Give him a little ask.
Okay.
All right. Welcome, everybody. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our Semester at Sea community. And thank you for joining us for this latest installment of the Wavelengths Alumni Series. So this online series highlights the talents of our Semester at Sea alumni around the world. There's an alum featured from a different industry and career or field every other Wednesday at 5 p.m. Mountain Time on the official Semester at Sea Facebook page. Also on the Alumni Association YouTube channel, so make sure to subscribe on the YouTube channel so you don't miss a thing. And I'm very happy to be here with you. My name is Monica Flores. I'm hosting Marcus Ashley. And just to give everybody a lay of the land, we're going to have about an hour together, round of introductions, reminiscing about Semester at Sea, kind of some standout moments from the voyage, what it was like for both of us, and what we learned that carried over into our professional and personal lives. We'll also wrap with some advice for those of you students who are coming on an upcoming voyage. Sound good,
Indeed.
Marcus?
Well,
Okay, so it gives
great
me
to me. And let me just say,
pleasure.
it's so nice to see you.
It is. We have not laid eyes on each other since probably just disembarking in Seattle, 1993. And this is indeed the first time we've spoken. So it's such a surprise, such a delight to speak with you today.
Yes, likewise.
So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Marcus Ashley to the group. He is a musician, editor, actor, writer, producer, screenwriter. He has over 30 credited appearances in feature films, television series, shorts, and his own productions. He's known for Murdering the First, Shameless, and Justified, and you may have also seen him in guest appearances in the series Bones, CSI New York, in a 3-episode stint on Ghost Whisperer, as well as on Big Slick, Soap, and Getting Lucky. Alongside his entertainment background, he's also had a long career as a creative force and has recently been honored as a screenplay finalist with the 2021 Page Turner Awards out of the United Kingdom, the 2021 Launchpad TV Pilot Screenwriting Competition Top 50, and he's on the Coverfly Red List, 1% of the top 1% of over 66,000 screenplays. That's where you can catch him. He's also a longtime musician. And so originally you were a drummer, Marcus. I did not know this. You taught yourself multiple instruments and began writing and recording songs as a youth, studied under the Steve Miller Band's Gordy Knudsen, went on to record your first solo album at Prince's Paisley Park Studios in Minneapolis, graduated from Boston University, and that's where you were when we went on the voyage together, and has since been in Los Angeles, where you wrote and produced recordings of over 300 original songs, in addition to performing in bands and producing material for other artists. And Marcus is sponsored by Gibson Guitars. So I'm also pleased to share, and this has been on repeat for me, Marcus, for the last 2 weeks, your newest musical feature, Folk Patrol, which you can find on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, and TikTok. So you can find him on as Marcus_wherever on Instagram.
Yes.
It's a pleasure to see you.
It's a pleasure to see you too. I should point out also that my full name is actually Marcus Ashley Femrite. So people that were on our journey would have known me as Marcus Femrite. But when I first came to LA and started a career in entertainment, I found it just easier to use my middle name, which is Ashley. So that's what I go by professionally, but people may not know that from back in the day.
Wonderful.
So how are you?
I've been good. I was talking with my husband yesterday. I wonder if there's been some sort of transit of Uranus or something where all of the heavy kind of astrological stuff is just dumping on the planet, because there's been so many ups and downs lately. And I think with COVID and the way everything has been with COVID, all of us have learned to be a little more open, a little less rigid, and a little more able to focus on what we have in our hands, like the people that we spend our time with, the work that we do, kind of our natural environment. I think it's just been a great reset, a real level setting for everybody. And so that's been what it's been like for me.
Indeed. So can I introduce you?
Of course, would love to.
So Monica Flores is a technical project manager and is certified in Agile methods, a longtime web developer supporting platform rollouts for Fortune 500 brands, government agencies, higher education publishers, and enterprise technology companies. She is a graduate of Cornell University's Agricultural and Biological Engineering Department. And after college, she traveled for 18 months to 30 plus countries with the Odyssey World Trek for Service and Education. And since 2004, she has created or led production of 200 plus websites, including the redesigns for Green America, a US Department of State funded international entrepreneur website, and Ashoka Changemakers. She serves in leadership for DC Femtech, and she is on the faculty for the Nonprofit Technology Professional Certificate. A two-time recipient of the N10 New York Award and the 2021 Future Stack Hack for Good Award, she speaks, writes, and presents on the content management systems, technology, and entrepreneurships. And you can find Monica on Facebook by searching for Monica Flores 1.
All right. Okay, out of the way. So, Marcus,
Yeah.
let's set the stage. So, 1993, we had just had the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. So that was 5 years prior. After that, F.W. de Klerk in South Africa released Nelson Mandela from prison. So that was in 1990. Then
And
President
you probably
Clinton,
heard he just passed away.
he just passed away yesterday. That's why I feel like
Yep.
history is just still alive for us.
I know.
After that, President Bill Clinton was sworn in as 42nd president of the United States, and that was just as we were leaving on our voyage. Then while we were on our voyage, Unforgiven won Best Picture, Best Director at the Academy Awards. And then I know on the ship, I don't know if you remember this, Jim Calderwood, our professor, he had a t-shirt that said Hong Kong 1997. Do you remember this? He had a t-shirt
Yes,
he would
I
wear,
do.
and he was on the ship as we were sailing into Hong Kong. So the stage is such that we had a very analog life. Like everything that you did was photos with actual photos, no digital.
Yes.
Like only some of us were able to use the sat phone, or some of us
Yeah.
had email, but we weren't really into it as much as we are today. So
Yeah.
at that time, though, you must have been at university. How did you hear about Semester at Sea?
Well, I actually was told about it by my my resident assistant my freshman year in my dorm, and she was a junior, I believe, and we had become friends. And she, one day out of the blue, mentioned this thing called Semester at Sea, which I had never heard of in my life. But as the second she started telling me about it, I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing. So she had a scheme that we would go on it together as friends and both go on the voyage. And as it happened, she did not end up going.
But you got to go. So were you a sophomore? Were you a junior? What year were you when you ended up going?
I was a sophomore at the time. I found out she was going to drop out and not go, but I decided, this is too incredible. I can't pass this opportunity up. So I just went for it. And I actually had to get a special dispensation from my school at Boston University to let me go, because normally they didn't want people studying abroad until they were juniors. But I had to go to the dean of the College of Communications, and I said, hey, I'd really like to do this. And at the time I was in the film program, which really kicked in starting junior year. And I kind of felt like, well, I don't want to miss, a whole semester of the main body of that work. So I'll go as a sophomore. Why not?
Why not? Hey, that's fantastic. Again, the voice, like the speaking that we do to people, we never know the ripples. So she was telling you, she didn't end up going, but then you ended up going.
I know.
Your whole trajectory. For me, I saw a printed poster in the student union. I was just walking through. It was a tough year. Cornell was hard for me. It was coming from San Diego, growing up in Florida, coming from San Diego and going to Ithaca, New York with the massive snowfalls and just not knowing how to cope with the winter. I was definitely excited about a potential opportunity to visit some of the places that we visited on our voyage. So yeah, I applied in my junior year. So it was spring of 93 was my junior year. And same thing, like excited to go out abroad. I was probably in the middle of my major, but I had saved up all of my liberal arts classes. So I took a playwriting class. I
Oh,
took communications with the professor was Professor Shelby, Annette Shelby. She was the first tenured woman at Georgetown's McDonough University, like the School of Business at Georgetown. And then I
really?
also had Joseph Scarpati, who was teaching urban geography. So it was my first experience with liberal arts. You know, I'd been taking math,
Yeah.
science, physics, computer science, all that stuff. So it was a great opportunity for me. It was super easy. I got A's in all my classes. Just like enjoying this so much. Awesome. And then we can talk to a little bit about our voyage. So the voyage itself started from Nassau, Bahamas. I'll see if I can actually share my screen. I can help.
Okay.
See if I can, what is it called? Illustrate this for the rest of the people on the call. Okay, so we started, let's see. We started in Nassau. Remember this. So you must have flown from either Boston or from where you were to the Bahamas.
Yes, I was
Came
actually,
here.
I'm from Minneapolis originally, so I flew down from Minneapolis, which talk about a drastic
Wow.
change in weather. January in Minneapolis to Nassau, Bahamas.
Wonderful. Then they checked us in into the voyage, and then we immediately took off and went to Caracas. So the port town is called La Guaira here in Venezuela.
Mhm.
Then we went around all the way down to Salvador, Brazil. So you remember this.
Yes.
And then I want to say, I don't know where the equator is. Was the equator crossing? It was. So do you recall there's a ceremony that happens for
Yeah,
people who are crossing the equator for the first time. So that must have happened on this leg. We
I
then
remember it well.
when you go on the voyage, participants in this webcast, you will be able to have that as well. We ended up in Cape Town, South Africa. And you know, at that, I was able to go and visit Desmond Tutu's house. They had a luncheon with some of the students from the ship. So talk about
Wow.
like that connection to history and to
Mhm.
all of that. We crossed this cape. This is the Cape of Good Hope. Good Hope. Ended
Yep.
up here in Mombasa. And this was, a lot of folks went on safari here in Kenya, right?
Yeah. Did you go, Monica?
I did. I went to, Marcus, I went to this, I forget the name of it, but I was roomed with one of our senior ships. You know, we had students and then we also had seniors on the ship. And I remember I had the best sleep of my life. There were this hundreds of frogs. There's a multitude of just
Oh.
chittering the entire night. And it was stars up above with the darkness, and just I couldn't believe it, because you know we're kids from the 90s,
Yeah.
and we live in the suburbs or whatnot, and then just to be in Africa. And what about you? Were you on a safari?
I did. Yeah, I did go on one, and it was absolutely incredible. I felt, you know, I mean, we'll probably discuss some of these things later a bit too, but I really felt like that experience was one of the highlights of the trip, and I felt in a lot of ways that it was life-changing. You know, it felt like returning to the cradle of humanity, you know, and the sunsets there, I just still stick out in my mind as being singular. In, you know, and we've all seen a lot of sunsets since then, but it was really incredible, the hues and the colors, and I felt really connected to something, you know, that was sort of beyond my experience, and I was really an incredible experience. Anyway, not to go on too long about that, but
No, I definitely. So I'm going to do the rest of our voyage, and then I want to get into this with you because this is what
yeah,
we're here to talk about. So after that, we went to India,
yeah,
which was to me one of the most fascinating. We were in kind of Tamil Nadu, spicy food, really hot,
yes,
Mahabalipuram temples. This Penang, Malaysia, this was a really short, easy hop all the
hmm,
way up to Hong Kong, where some of our shipmates went to China,
yeah,
visiting Beijing, and then to Taiwan.
yeah, which
And then
is
we had,
in
we'll
the
talk about
news
that.
a lot these days.
Then we ended up in Kobe, Japan, and then there was this long voyage all the way to Seattle, and that brought us home. And that was the last time I saw you, probably almost 30 years ago. Okay, so
Yes,
let's go back to what you're talking about. Okay, so in terms of I'm going to assume that you hadn't had a chance to visit any of these places prior to the voyage.
correct.
Me
Yeah,
either.
yeah.
And so what is your thinking about that? Like, we were so young. And I think throwing these students, sophomore, juniors, into a shipboard environment, being kind of closely packed with people from all over the country, all over the world, having to interact in that environment, and then being put into these just completely different places. I think it was the start of a lifelong kind of, not a sense of nomadicness, but also the sense of exploration, being open to wonder, being open to color, being open to new experiences. So what would you think about that? Like, would you recommend it to somebody? But also, like, what was that like for you?
Well, I mean, on that first thought, of course, yeah. I mean, I think semester at sea it is a singular program and a singular experience, and I think it's really an incredible thing to be a part of, and it I mean, I do still to this day think about it. Things come up all the time that recall experiences and memories, and I think that it allowed me to have an understanding of the world that I clearly would never have gotten. I mean, it's just, the prospect of taking a journey and going completely around the world as we did, and just visiting so many different cultures and seeing, the differences between cultures, but also the strong similarity. You just realize how how as people, we are all so strongly connected, and we share so many of the same experiences and values. The nuances may change, but we are all so closely related, and I carry that with me strongly, I think, even now. And I clearly the adventure of it is something that I don't think I will ever be able to repeat in my life, and I'm so grateful that I was able to go on it.
It
I
was,
loved it.
it was like a set aside time. It was just 100 days, and looking back at
Yeah.
it, the fact that each of those 100 days could have had such a widespread impact. For me,
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, as you were going through the map, it was like I just going from one stop to the next. I mean, there were so many things that just seeing that the instant recall of hundreds of just moments. And I mean, I could talk for days about just the going from Nassau to Venezuela.
I think for me, after the trek, I mean, after the voyage, I was just so hungry for more experiences. So I actually went on the Odyssey World Trek for Service and Education. I was 18 months afterward. It was one of the first times when internet cafes were starting to get open. That's where I learned how to code, because we would stay in a hostel and I would negotiate for extra days for my traveling companions and I, in exchange for building them like a website. So we would literally we would extend our stay in each of the places through doing tech, right? Like, so that was my first exposure to tech. And I know you were also involved with music ever since, like you were in the Gong Show, you were in the talent show, you were performing in the band on the voyage show. I'll make sure to share with the Institute for Shipboard Education some of the little clips that we have.
Yeah. Well, part of that was actually a big part of my personal journey too, because I was able to meet some like-minded folks on board the ship who played, various instruments, and we whiled away many an evening playing guitars on the deck and playing for the shows. And another feature of my personal voyage was that I decided early on that I would make it a goal to play drums with a local band in each country that we stopped at.
Really?
And I managed to almost pull it off. I didn't do it in Taiwan, but as far as I remember, every other place I found some band to sit in with, which is kind of astonishing.
How would you do that? Through the student groups, or would you just go out to a local club, or how would you?
out traveling around, and we would stop in a place and there would be a live band playing, and I guess being young, I thought, oh, why not just ask? And amazingly, they I would approach the drummer in a break between their set and say, hey, I'm here and I'd love to just play with you guys. So it ran the gamut. I played with a percussion ensemble that I saw perform in the Bahamas, and then all the way down to like a jazz trio, I think, in South Africa that was playing in wine country somewhere. It was just a huge,
fantastic.
So anyway, that was a fun memory, and a part of what, a small part of giving shape to the voyage for me too.
Yeah, so just curious too. So Africa as the heartbeat of cradle of civilization, and then drums as being like one of the first, if not the first, mechanism of people creating
right.
Music, and music bringing people together. So it's just this constant, like the heartbeat, going back to percussion as the main thread through everything. Well, that was your first instrument, right?
Yes, yeah, it was. And I, I responded strongly to that. I mean, I loved everywhere we went too, just sort of seeing the local percussion instruments were fascinating to me, and each area has their own sort of special, version of their instruments, and it's always interesting to see what people do with them, and the different, ways that they structure time in music is also interesting. Certain parts of the world don't necessarily foremost follow everything in 4 beats, which is what Western music generally does. Which is, so it was fascinating to meet local musicians and to talk with them about what they do, and I certainly felt like I learned a lot from meeting those people.
Wow, what a conversation. I've heard of how people could use drums to carry far distances and send a message, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not just even music or appreciation of music, but it's also communication and connection, keeping people connected.
Yes.
Let's see. This is fascinating. I'm just like, again, with a musician, I think, again, I studied music as a child, so I was a pianist for the church and did.
Oh, you did?
The accompaniment, and I did the weddings and funerals, that kind of thing. I was like working musician. But I definitely, I find that, especially for the different musical releases that you've done over the years, like I would like to hear about some of what that has been like, at least will bring us to today, current projects. So you've had, I would say Folk Patrol is almost completely different from some of your other work. And I wonder if this is, like, what's the evolution of the process for you? How has that been? Or where are you sitting right now with your music?
Well, right at this moment, I'm actually sitting in my studio. Which I find I have a window that I'm facing, actually, so the light is nice, which is why I picked it. But I've done a lot of different things over the years, and things have definitely evolved. I shortly after graduating from college, I had a record deal with a small label in Minneapolis, which is how I came to do an album at Prince's Paisley Park Studios, which was an amazing experience. And I got to meet Prince at the time. And then when I came to LA, I did some more solo work that the label that I was with folded, actually, after a period of time. So then I was kind of on my own again, and I did a lot of music. And then kind of out of left field, my wife and I ended up creating music that, it's kind of a long, crazy story, but she was asked to perform in a commercial for Amazon, which led to us getting asked to do music, or to, at least present music. And initially we tried to give the opportunity away because we felt like we didn't have time and we weren't the right people to do it. And we tried to give it to a friend of ours. Do you want to do this?
And they said no.
Well,
you're the one.
They were busy too, so we thought, well, we'll just, we'll do it. We can do this, and actually turned into a huge part of my life over the last 10 years or so, because we not only ended up doing that music, but it turned into a contract to license songs for all of the Amazon Kindle commercials that were out at the time. And that led to, you know, a lot of press exposure and a lot of downloaded music. It was all downloads at the time, not streaming, which is kind of funny to look back on now, because, you know, music has evolved in the way that it's consumed over the years. But and that led to a publishing deal, a music songwriting deal with a big record company, and that was sort of, it took over my life. I actually stepped away from acting and writing for a period of years until about 2016, when I came back into it. And part of what changed was that my wife and I, our daughter was born, and it had just become kind of unsustainable to keep all these things going at the time. But in the interim, then I had kept recording music, and this new thing that I'm doing with Folk Patrol is actually the first stuff that I'm releasing, though I have a lot of music in the can, as they say. So there will be more to come from that. Yeah, and there was a lot of music licensing. You know, I placed a lot of songs in TV shows and various things along the way, which it's a big topic. I'm not sure where to
No. That's another like thing that I had been thinking about is I've followed you and Annie for many years now, and I would always be interested in what you thought about, like you talked about consumption of music. So, you know, to some extent, Marcus, I feel like there's a little bit of the forward facing, the public facing side needs to be, you had Sexy Happy, right? Like the poppy, it was very upbeat. It was a very upbeat and positive type of style. And I just wonder what you thought about having that kind of relentless public face. And then the idea that music generation creating is somewhat of an personal and an intensely kind of private journey. So how do you traverse that between, like, do you take time every day, or do you kind of mass it up and then say, I'm just going to take 30 days and create this music and then do it? Or is it built into your life? Like, how do you navigate that flow of artistic process and then realizing that, yeah, you still have something due at the end of the month, or you have to have these types of
things? I mean, well, it was interesting with Little and Ashley, because a lot of, which was the name of my duo with my wife, and it, you know, a lot of what we did, I mean, we were launched essentially writing songs that were used in commercials, which were very upbeat and very, you know, happy kind of music. And so I did, in a way, feel that I had to put aside some of my darker artistic impulses for that period of time. And what I quickly realized, you know, getting signed to a songwriting deal, and this goes for other things that I've done as well, is particularly screenwriting, that it's, you know, at the end of the day, it's a job, it's work. And so this idea that, you know, we have to wait for the muse to strike, or that, you know, it's something that there's some magical lightning bolt that needs to come down. And it really is, it's not completely untrue, but on some level, you have to be able to have a work ethic around all these things and just say, okay, I need to work at this, you know, and this is, even if I'm not feeling inspired today, if I get myself in front of my tools, something will happen. And that has become kind of a guiding principle for me too, that this is something that you don't need to wait for things to strike. You just have to go ahead and sit down and do it. And I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
No, yeah, it's like the 10,000 hours, right? Like the craft, it's just continually hammering at it. And it's not that somehow you just magically arrive, it's that you've been working on it all this time.
Yeah, and at this, you know, and then and now, I mean, for me, it's all about, I do it daily, as opposed to, you know, I mean, occasionally if I have a big project, I'll have to do a big push on something at the end and kind of, you know, get it all wrapped up. But aside from that, it's a daily process. It's something that I do, almost every day.
Wow, that's very cool. I mean, you're a working artist, you're a working musician, Marcus.
Yeah,
Not many people can say that they can have that as their life. So,
well, it's definitely been challenging at times, and it requires, I think any of these kind of creative fields require a tolerance for risk and a tolerance for uncertainty that, I have. It's challenged me from time to time, being able to plow through periods where things just seemingly aren't working for whatever reason. As much as I'd like to say everything is just smooth sailing all the time.
Yeah, sometimes it's just finding out which methods don't work. So to switch, I can talk a little bit about the technology, like
I wanted to ask you about that, please.
Yeah, it's very similar. So I would say, so I've been working in web development now since I said working on the Odyssey World Trek, building websites. I came back to San Francisco, and in that period of time, the whole boom, like 2000,
right?
People were driving their BMWs and then parking them on the street, on the pavement, and then paying the parking fee because it's cheaper than having to try and find parking. And they'd be like, wow. "Yeah, I'm just going to be in the club. Just give me a ticket, no problem." Right? And so I feel like that kind of competition, the competitive nature of it, started to overcome what I came to the web for, which was just that sense of not being alone. So if you recall, early days, YouTube was all fun stuff, right? Like Laughing Baby and Numa, and just what it started with was people being able to connect over time, over space, share ideas, share just the ideas and community. And then, of course, it's become a lot more commercialized because, what corporation doesn't want to take over that and say, yeah, we're the brand for that, right? So in the ensuing period, I've taught myself HTML, and then I got onto this content management system, which is called Drupal. It's a open source, and what it is it allows many different people to contribute to it. So it's constantly evolving, and there's a base kind of model that handles things like login, page creation, article creation, but then other people have added on to it. So now all of the different components that one would think a nonprofit or a government or an education or an enterprise site would need are all available as what's called contributed modules. So it's very much open source, is about people contributing back to the community and contributing back to the code base. So I've been building on that platform since 2008. We started our own business in 2004. We moved from California to Hawaii. We raised our first and second children in Hawaii.
Amazing.
Yeah,
I'd love to hear more about that, actually, too, living in Hawaii.
Yeah, absolutely. We were on vacation, I think, with my mother-in-law, and we just loved it. And I felt like, okay, back to kind of the cradle and animism, but I felt like the island was calling us, Marcus, to come and be a person or a family, to just be a part of the fabric and the nature of it. So Molokai is gosh, I wasn't expecting to talk about it. It was very spiritual. It was very much it's the most Hawaiian island. So people speak Hawaiian. A lot of the folks who are there have always been there. So, there's been statehood and all of this stuff, but people are still speaking Hawaiian, and they are Hawaiian. And then the land itself, there's this idea of mana, the nature essence. And then people bring that, there are people always going on missions. So you would find some amazing things. We found huge rock crystals just placed strategically in areas. We had heiaus, which are old stone, ancient burial sites, just like behind the school, like in some field. Somebody had created the pyramid at the soul of the world. So if you take our planet and you put 4 corners of a cube, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 corners of a cube on land, one of the corners juts out on Molokai. So they built a pyramid, which, if you think about it, is the edge of like a Rubik's cube.
Right.
So people would go visit that. Again, same thing. It would just be normal life, but then in the middle of it would be this completely spiritual practice. So it was really, I have my lays and everything from the time. But then when my daughter was born there, when we reached slightly older school age, we came back to the mainland. So we were in San Diego for 2 years.
Okay.
And then after that, we came here to Arlington, Virginia, outside of Washington, D.C. So we've been here for about 7 years.
Okay.
But yeah, just the whole time doing tech, right? So constantly building websites, constantly evolving with where tech is going.
Was that challenging to do? So Molokai, you said, how did you choose Molokai? That's fascinating.
Yeah, again, we went on vacation.
As we think of islands, that's one of the lesser known of the Hawaiian Islands.
I know. It just needed us. It needed somebody like us for that time period. And so it's interesting to me now. So my sister ended up on Hawaii. My other sister ended up on in London, in Nottingham. So everybody's on an island. My parents are in the Philippines. So all of the members of my family are on islands right now.
Yeah.
But I think there's something to be said for when in an island or when any kind of insular community, people just have a lot closer feedback cycle with each other, with birth, life, death. We had a death in the family. We had a birth in the family while we were on Molokai. And then just carrying that with us. So when we left to return to the mainland, it was definitely like a rocket landing. Like you come back and you have abundant groceries. You could go to a Starbucks. You could go to a bookstore. You can get milk for less than $8 a gallon. You can wrap up your clothes. Right, like because there's a totally different perception. That said, I would highly recommend for people who have that lust, that wanderlust, to go to a place like set aside, like Hawaii experience was for us, to definitely follow that through. I mean, I would say that for anybody. Like if you have a connection to a place, like explore that. You've been in LA all this time. I don't think you're going to move anytime soon. So this is where your home is, right?
It is, yeah. I mean, we've certainly discussed options if ever we decide to leave. I mean, and I definitely chose this place because of the industry. It was where I needed to be, but it has very much grown into a home, for us, and we like it. I was just going to say quickly too, one of the things that I was thinking about when you were talking about Hawaii as well is that I feel like semester at sea, I developed a real connection to the sea part of it as well. I mean, I know that the focus of the program ostensibly is to go places and to experience cultures, but you touched on it earlier for a second about learning to live in that community on board a ship where everyone is together for periods of time, and I felt like the other part of that for me was developing a real feel for and appreciation for being at sea, and feeling a connection to, we talked about the cradle of humanity in Africa, and this sort of primordial connection to past history, and I felt that too with the sea on semester at sea, and I gained a real appreciation for the seafarers of history, that's for sure.
Absolutely, I felt that as well. Were you there? It was my first experience with snow falling on the ocean.
Yeah, that's right.
And also, I got one of those hammocks and I strung it up towards the front, up to the bulkhead or whatever that was called at the very front. And people would spend all night out there. They would sleep out there and just be under the stars with the ocean. And I think it's interesting, Marcus, we did spend time on land. That was always a highlight, but we actually spent a lot of time in between, in transit, and it was all on the ocean. Do you remember the flushing toilets with the bioluminescent? Did that happen for you?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Wow, I haven't thought about that for a long time. That's amazing.
It was fascinating. And then, it does give one pause to think of how humans can traverse the earth through just whatever sight lines or whatever magnetic lines or whatever sea.
Well, and imagining doing it without the benefit of the technology that we have now, it's pretty astonishing, and I felt too like it, it is, it's part of the sea, I think, is part of our DNA, and growing up in the Midwest, I hadn't had a lot of experience with the ocean, aside from the odd vacation here and there. And then it was my first real exposure to it. And that to me was another incredibly positive part of semester at sea, was being able to experience living on the ocean. I mean, how many people get to do that?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. After the initial kind of getting used to the meds and the nausea and all of that, and then becoming like really comfortable, really feeling comfortable, and then thinking of it as a home, right? Like even when we landed in a port, we still, some people would come back and sleep on the ship, right? Like that would be the place to go.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, it's, well, talking to you about this today, I wish I could go back on it like next week, We
were not without our share of tragedies as well. I know when we were in Taiwan, we did lose a shipmate, Brett Crawford. He would have been like our age today.
Yeah.
And I know that at the time it was quite a shock for everyone on board. It really kind of drove home the idea that life is very precious, and whatever we can do in the moment, like leave it all out on the field, share what you can, all of that.
Yeah. Well, I would say, that was a real shock. And I think it again, kind of relates to this theme of, what you were just saying, do what you can while you can. And I think semester at sea, I love the lifelong learner program, and I'm always closely following that. But to do it as a younger person as well, I mean, it is a time in your life when you are able to do those things. You have very few commitments. You can take off for an entire semester to go live on a ship, and clearly as you get older, it becomes more difficult to do things like that. And so I would, again, if someone is thinking about doing it, do it, because I'm so glad that I did, and
absolutely.
The prospect of figuring out how to do something like that now sounds just, it seems very difficult. So
yeah, and one thing I remember being on the ship, the way it was marketed was the floating university. I would be taking my classes and all of that. But when we arrived, I think that the idea of having families aboard ship with young children, as well as having seniors, I think that really helped with whatever, just the collection of humans that was on board. It really made it quite even. Do you know what I mean? Like it didn't feel just huge young people, like young people. It was much more, okay, well, there's pockets and there's people connecting with each other, and people would sit at each other's tables.
I felt like it helped us as younger people keep perspective, on where we fit into the sort of overall arc of a life and a journey, and it maybe helped us to keep a little bit from being too sort of self-centered, as we're this group of young people and we're going around and we're having adventures.
Yeah, looking back, I mean, again, it feels as if no time has passed. I did learn about this. It's because there's plasticity in your brain, but your actual nerves are very long-lived. So the brain, the way that you feel inside is pretty much the same from like 8 to 80. So you really do feel the same as you did then, as you feel now, and you probably will feel in the future.
Right. Well, I still, I would say I still kind of feel like I don't know. I'm not sure where you're getting this whole 30 years thing from.
I know, right? But it's happened. It passed so quickly, and all of us have, come from that and moved on to all of the different parts of our life. Yeah, I'd be curious to hear from you what types of qualities or what types of, I don't know, like traits that you had back then that you continue to express now. I mean, I think for both of us, it's about continuing to move forward, like incremental.
Yeah. Well, I think, I think the decision to go on semester at sea, and particularly to go alone, for me, I mean, clearly a lot of people go on their own as well. But there were also groups of friends. I'm sure you knew that people had made the decision to go together so they would have sort of built-in companions. And I think that sort of deciding to pull the trigger on that for me was a big moment of saying, okay, I'm gonna go with the flow here, and I'm gonna just see where the waves take me, if you will.
I love it.
And stay open to not trying to keep everything tightly controlled, I guess, and to opening myself up to having new experiences with new people, and sort of going forward into the unknown, which I do think was something that I had in me, but it was brought to the fore by a semester at sea. And I, excuse me, I was actually reminded of that a couple of years ago. I was flown to Israel to guest star on an Israeli TV show.
I remember you visited the Wailing Wall and the dome.
I did, yeah. I posted some things about it, and one of the things that I was over there for a little while, but as it happened, I had come over with a couple of other American actors and then had met some Israeli actors, but I really wanted to go and see Jerusalem. And the time that I was not filming didn't intersect with the times that my companions weren't filming. And it also happened to lie on Sabbath. So that means in Israel that all the trains and buses and everything shut down. And I was in Tel Aviv, and but I thought, if I don't go now, I'm not going to get to go. So, I decided again, well, I'm going to go by myself, and I think, it reminded me of semester at sea in a lot of ways. And I think it also gave me, a lot of confidence to know, how to do it. You go down here and hire a private bus, and, with a bunch of strangers that, and I think, it allowed me to feel like I can do that. I've been on semester at sea. I know how to do these things.
True. If anything, it reduces the kind of obsessive self-focus, because you realize you're just like anybody else. And at the same time, you're unique, but at the same time, like, the universe is here to support you. Our ship was literally named the SS Universe. Like,
right.
We could step out and feel confident that the world would step out to meet us as well.
Right. And I think semester at sea gives you a lot of tools for how to navigate, and coming from, the US and being dropped into another country, sometimes people naturally would feel a little bit uncomfortable, doing things. But I felt like, semester at sea, it gives you a protected space in which to learn those skills, which I think are really useful going forward.
That's true.
Did you? I'm just curious. It's reminding me of things. You mentioned India when we were going through the map, and did you have experiences in India that you felt like were particularly significant to you?
I think that, Marcus, the idea of something being 100% completely foreign was, to my mind, the most interesting part of that. So I had visited some of these temples, and there was also a dance troupe that performed for us. So some of these temples were like 3,000 years old, stone carvings of figures and multiple layers, right? Like 40 stories of intricate stone. We had no shoes. We didn't wear shoes. It was so hot. We had to, as women, some of the women had to cover. And I remember, and the food was completely like spicy. I think when you take somebody out of their norm and you bring them into something completely different, it just challenges everything about them. I think that is where, like you say, there's this growth, there's this better sense of self-reliance and self-confidence. And then there's also this sense that we're not just so wrapped up in our kind of small town type of problems. Like, we are citizens of the world. I think semester at sea really drove that home for us, is that our actions individually, as a country, as a
Mhm.
nation to ripple out to wherever we go, and that it's important to keep informed. If anything, I would think that my interest in India continued out of that, and I continue to have, you know, Indian friends and work with Indian
Mhm.
developers through my work, and so I think that any opportunity that potential students might have to challenge themselves, and I think that's what semester C is. It's presented as a challenge. It's supported, but it is a challenge. It's only a certain type of person that wants to go
Yeah.
on this type of voyage, right?
Mhm.
So I think that that is what calls people. And I honestly think that if you hadn't answered that call, I think you would really be wondering today what it would have been like. Of course, life would have gone on. Of course, things would have happened. But you may
Right.
not have had as much satisfaction in some of the choices that you've had or the
Yeah.
choices you've made because of that.
Well, I think you summed it up nice and succinctly by saying that the growth and self-reliance that came from it, I think, is a huge part of what has carried forward for me, and I would imagine for a lot of other people too. You know.
Yeah. Well, time has flown by. I have been asked by the Institute for Shipboard Education if you have any other advice for future semester at sea alumni. So I guess that's somebody going on board the ship and then maybe somebody disembarking, and what is their next step? Like closing
Mm,
thoughts, advice.
that's
Maybe you give yourself advice from 30 plus years ago.
well, first let me say I can't. I'm astonished. Like I feel like we just. I mean, you. This is such a big experience and such a big part of life that to talk about it for an hour seems like it's a travesty. There's so much to say. But in terms of advice, all good things come to an end, I guess, as they say. Uh, in terms of advice, one thing that and this is kind of, on a level of fairly basic, bring a sleeping bag, because I didn't. And
No.
I thought I was going to be a true adventurer and bring a blanket.
How'd that work for you?
Well, when you're laying on the savannah in Africa and there's lots of insects and critters and things, I would have probably preferred to have something that closed around the bottom. So bring one. Don't be like
Awesome.
me. Don't just bring a blanket.
I would say my advice would be for folks to keep, again, an open mind, but also potentially bring some sort of journal, some sort of logging kind of software or tool, because I think the incremental change between day 1 and day 100, you don't know that stuff has changed, but honestly, people have changed tremendously, right? So
Yeah.
having a way to process that.
Mhm.
And I think another piece of advice I would have given to myself was to be a little more open. I know what you had talked about. I too had come as a single student. I didn't know anybody, and nobody from my
Yeah.
school was actually. I take that back. There was another couple students from my school, but I only met them on board the ship.
Oh,
But
yeah.
I think that idea that I think prior to that point, I was a lot more rigid or kind of brittle about my
Mhm.
understandings of people. And I think being on board, living in close quarters, being exposed
Yeah.
helped me understand that at the basic part of it, we're all very similar. We may have different
Mhm.
ways that we express that, but at the heart, everybody wants to be loved, to be appreciated, to learn, right? Like to have a new experience, to be cared for. It's very human needs.
It, I agree wholeheartedly, and I would say too that in thinking about all of the benefits of going on semester at sea and all of the challenges and all of the growth, as we've been talking about, but I do think that is, in addition to this sort of affinity for the sea and learning about that, but there's also the social element and the sort of human dynamic of living on board a ship. I think was also, it sounds like for you and for me, a moment of growth too, and learning how to had to be around people in that environment, I think was very helpful going forward, you know.
Yeah, and I think also for today's students, they may have much more access to internet or to blogs or Instagram or YouTube. I know for us, when we left, there was just the student director, so we would manually, I wrote to you, I think in Minnesota, just like paper. And then it was
Yes.
only until much later that people can continue back to connect with each other.
Right.
So yeah, I'm really pleased to be able to have connected with you in the context of other stuff as well as for this.
Likewise.
I will wrap this. So we, for those of you who are tuning in, again, join us every other Wednesday at 5 p.m. Mountain Time, right here on our Semester at Sea Facebook page and the Semester at Sea Alumni Association YouTube channel for the next installment of our Wavelengths Alumni Series. And if you or someone you know from your voyage has an interesting story to share about how Semester at Sea has influenced your life or career path, please email wavelengths@semesteratsea.org to be considered for a future Wavelength series segment. So thank you for joining us, everyone, and thank you, Marcus. Such a wonderful conversation.
It really was, and thank you for having me. And you know, as a parting shot, I would say go on Semester at Sea, please, and support the program because it's a really amazing and unique and singular thing in the world, and the world needs more of what we can learn from going on a trip like this.
100%. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, talk soon. Bye-bye.